In the sun-baked valley of Redemption Creek, where windswept plains meet jagged mountains, appearances can be deceiving. Behind the weathered hands of a seemingly ordinary rancher lies a past written in gunsmoke and legend, a past that's about to collide with a gang of outlaws who chose the wrong target. They're about to learn that some rattlers don't lose their bite with age. They just get better at choosing when to strike. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Morning dew clung to the tall prairie grass surrounding Samuel Hawkins's modest ranch house, like nature's own warning system. At 68, his daily routine had become as predictable as the desert. Winds, or so the folks of Redemption Creek believed. Every morning, he'd ride his old paint horse into town, order the same black coffee and cornbread at Sarah Cooper's general store, and spend hours whittling wood on the front porch while watching the world go by with hands that sometimes trembled. Too much to hold his coffee cup steady, today was different. His arthritic fingers, a carefully practiced affectation developed over years of study, traced the edges of an old cavalry chest hidden beneath the loose floorboards of his bedroom. Inside lay memories he'd rather forget. A matched pair of Colt revolvers with pearl handles, their bluing worn smooth by years of use. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age, and a golden pocket watch with a bullet lodged in its face, stopping time at the moment that had changed everything. A particular clipping caught his eye. Shadow of the West strikes again, notorious Mason gang found dead at dawn. He quickly folded it away. Those days were better left buried. The local children called him Old Sam, the harmless rancher who lived alone at the edge of town with his cattle dog, Buck. They'd whisper about how he talked to his animals like they were people, how he startled at the sound of gunfire during festival celebrations, and how he never had visitors except for Martha Reynolds, who brought supplies from the next county over every month. Even Sarah Cooper, who'd run the general store for the past 7 years, saw nothing more than a kind-hearted old-timer who overpaid for his goods and always asked after her boy Jimmy's schooling. What they didn't see were the carefully hidden caches of weapons and ammunition scattered across his property, each maintained with obsessive care. They didn't notice how his daily rides always took him past key vantage points around town, or how his trembling hands steadied like iron when he was alone. They never questioned why Buck, despite his age, moved with the precise discipline of a military scout dog, or why the ranch's modest exterior concealed a complex network of escape routes and hiding spots. The morning light filtered through his window as Sam performed his daily ritual of checking his surveillance points. From his bedroom window, he could see clear across the valley to where the stage road wound its way through Thunder Pass. To the south, the town's church steeple provided a perfect marker for measuring distances. He'd chosen this property for its tactical advantages, though he'd told the townsfolk he simply liked the view of the sunrise over the mountains. Sam's carefully constructed facade began to crack the day 3 riders appeared in Redemption Creek. They rode black horses and wore city clothes too fine for the frontier, their eyes lingering too long on the town's bank and the sheriff's office. He spotted them from his usual spot on Sarah's porch, watching their reflection in the store window while they asked casual questions about local business and residents. Their spurs were tied up, a telltale sign of men expecting trouble. That evening, as Sam prepared his dinner, a skill he'd perfected during his decades of solitude, a signal fire flickered briefly on the distant hills, visible only from his bedroom window. The coded message was simple. They found you. The Thornes. Right again. His mind flashed back to that fateful day 15 years ago, when he'd brought Blackjack Thorne to justice, only to have the outlaw escape the hangman's noose through a corrupt judge's ruling. His hand didn't shake at all as he moved to the hidden cellar beneath his barn. Behind a false wall that looked like nothing more than old grain storage lay a room that would have shocked his neighbors. Alongside sophisticated rifles that wouldn't be common for another 20 years sat enough ammunition to fight a small war. But it was the leather-bound journal on the rough-hewn desk that held his attention now. Its pages contained details of a past life, one that had earned him a different name in 3 territories, and a reputation that still made hardened outlaws wake in cold sweats. They knew him back then as the Shadow of the West, not for his ability to disappear after a gunfight, though he was certainly good at that. The nickname came from the way he could walk into any situation, blend in perfectly, and execute his plans without anyone ever realizing he was anything but what he appeared to be. For 15 years, he had been the territory's most effective marshal, the man governors called when they needed problems solved quietly and permanently. That was before Redemption Creek, before he decided to disappear for real. He'd chosen this quiet valley carefully, building his cover story piece by piece, the limp from an old cattle wound, the tremor in his hands attributed to years of hard ranch work, the quiet demeanor of a man who'd spent too much time alone with his horses. Every detail of Samuel Hawkins's life was crafted to ensure no one looked twice at the quiet old rancher who lived on the edge of town. Buck padded over silently, the dog's keen senses already alert to the change in his master's demeanor. Together, they watched through the spyglass as the 3 riders made another pass by the bank, their movements too careful, their timing too precise. They weren't random outlaws looking for an easy score, they were scouts, and somehow they'd caught his scent. Blackjack Thorne had finally found him, and the storm that was coming would test everything he'd built in this quiet corner of the West. Sam reached down to scratch behind Buck's ears, the dog's muscles tense with anticipation. "Looks like retirement's over, old friend," he murmured, his voice carrying none of the quaver he used in public. Time to remind them why they used to fear the shadows. As night fell over Redemption Creek, Samuel Hawkins began making preparations that would have seemed impossible for the frail rancher the town thought they knew. His movements were fluid and precise as he checked each of his hidden caches, years of muscle memory replacing the artificial tremor he'd cultivated so carefully. Buck kept watch, the dog's training allowing him to signal silently if anyone approached within half a mile of the ranch. Through his spyglass, Sam watched as the 3 riders split up, taking rooms at different locations, one at the saloon, one at the Widow Parker's boarding house, and one making camp just outside town. Their positioning created a perfect triangle of surveillance around the bank. Professional work, though he'd expect nothing less from Blackjack Thorne's men. "Martha," he whispered into a carefully concealed telegraph device hidden in his cellar, using a code they'd developed years ago. "Wake the network." The response came quickly, dots and dashes conveying urgent news. "Multiple riders spotted at Thunder Pass. Heavy weapons. Thorne leads them personally." Sam's jaw tightened. Blackjack was coming himself. This wasn't just about the bank. The old outlaw must have finally discovered who really brought down his gang 15 years ago, who had tracked them through 3 territories and ended their reign of terror in a single night of precisely orchestrated violence. Moving to a locked trunk beneath his workbench, Sam retrieved items he'd hoped never to need again. A black duster coat, specially modified with reinforced leather and hidden pockets. A gunfighter's rig designed to look plain but perfectly balanced, for his draw. And most importantly, a tin star from his martial days, its surface scratched and dented but still carrying the weight of authority. "Your exit route is clear." Martha's telegraph clicked again. "Why stay?" Sam's eyes drifted to a worn photograph on his desk, a group of townspeople standing in front of the newly built schoolhouse. He was in the background, appearing to lean heavily on his cane while actually surveying the area for threats. Sarah Cooper stood front and center, her young son Jimmy proudly holding up his primer book. They'd built something special here in Redemption Creek, a community worth protecting. "Some things matter more than hiding," he tapped back. The network Martha commanded had been years in the making. Former deputies, reformed outlaws, and ordinary citizens who owed their lives to the Shadow of the West. Now they served as his eyes and ears across the territory, watching for signs of old enemies stirring. Tonight they were reporting unprecedented movement, riders converging on Redemption Creek from every direction. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. To us! Now back to the story. Sam moved to check his weapons, each one maintained in perfect condition, despite appearing aged and worn to any casual observer. His matched Colts had been modified with hair triggers and special sights of his own design. The rifles in his cache were the finest money could buy, each one carefully altered to appear common and unremarkable. Buck's ears suddenly perked up, and Sam froze. Through the evening silence came the soft crunch of boots on gravel. Someone, trying very hard to move quietly, was approaching his ranch. Sam quickly dimmed his lantern and moved to a specially designed viewing port, one of many he'd built into the walls of his home. In the moonlight, he recognized Will Quickdraw Carson, one of Thorne's top gunmen, making what he thought was a stealthy approach to Sam's barn. The man's reputation with a gun was well earned, but he'd never learned the value of patience. Even now, his eagerness to scout ahead of the main force might cost him dearly. "Easy, Buck," Sam whispered, laying a calming hand on the dog's head. "Let him have his look around. We want him to report back that he found exactly what he expected. Just a harmless old rancher." Through his viewing port, Sam watched as Carson searched the barn's main floor, missing completely the carefully hidden cellar entrance. The gunman's frustration was visible, as he found nothing more interesting than farm tools and horse tack, all deliberately aged and worn to maintain the how. Illusion. Martha's telegraph clicked again. Carson's presence confirms it. Thorne's bringing his entire inner circle. Snake-Eye Thompson spotted at Copper Creek. Mexican Pete moving through Indian territory. The pieces were falling into place. Thorne wasn't just planning a bank robbery. He was gathering his most trusted men for something bigger. The bank would just be the bait, designed to draw out the man who had destroyed his gang all those years ago. "How many total?" Sam tapped back. "At least 15 confirmed. More expected. They're heavily armed. Saw new Winchester rifles and explosives. This isn't just a manhunt. They're equipped for war." Sam allowed himself a grim smile. Thorne had learned from their last encounter. No more small groups that could be picked off one by one. This time he was bringing overwhelming force, but in doing so, he'd made a crucial mistake. 15 men, no matter how well armed, meant 15 sets of tracks to follow, 15 patterns to analyze, 15 weaknesses to exploit. As Carson finally gave up his search and slipped away into the night, Sam began making his own preparations. He had spaced his weapon caches carefully throughout the town over the years, in the livery stable's hayloft, beneath the floorboards of the church, even in a hidden compartment in Sarah's store. Each one contained everything needed to turn the tables on men who thought they were the hunters rather than the hunted. "Tell our friends in town," he telegraphed to Martha. "The storm is coming. Protocol 7. Sam checked his pocket watch, the one that still worked, not the bullet-stopped one he carried for show. He had maybe 12 hours before Thorne's main force arrived. 12 hours to transform Redemption Creek from a quiet frontier town into a carefully laid trap. 12 hours to ensure that when the storm broke, the only casualties would be among those who had chosen to bring violence to his home. "Time to wake up old ghosts," he whispered to Buck as they prepared to move out into the night, "and remind them why they used to fear the shadows." The pre-dawn hours painted Redemption Creek in shades of gray and shadow, perfect cover for a man who'd made darkness his ally. Sam moved through town like a ghost, Buck padding silently beside him, as they began implementing the first phase of his plan. His practiced limp was gone, replaced by the fluid movement of a predator preparing his hunting ground. Sarah Cooper was already awake when he slipped through the back door of her store, Buck keeping watch outside. She didn't startle at his silent entrance. They'd planned for this possibility years ago, though she'd hoped they'd never need to use it. "The riders in black," she whispered, watching him check the hidden compartments he'd built into her storeroom. "They're Thorne's men, aren't they?" "Yes," Sam replied, his voice carrying none of its usual quaver. "And more are coming. You remember what we discussed? If things go wrong, Jimmy and I take the tunnel beneath the store to the cave system, she finished. But Sam, the man I saw today asking questions, he looked just like the sketch in your journal. Thorne's son? Sam's hands stilled on the rifle he was checking. James Thorne. He was just a boy when I brought his father's gang down. Now he's leading the advanced team. A ghost of emotion crossed his weathered face. I'd hoped he'd choose a different path. The hidden compartment in Sarah's storeroom contained more than weapons. Sam retrieved several small pouches of black powder, specially prepared to create diversions when needed, and a set of custom-made throwing knives that could puncture a man's hand before he could pull a trigger. Martha's message said 15 men at least, Sarah continued, helping him check the equipment. Even for the Shadow of the West, those aren't good odds. They're better than they look, Sam replied, a hint of his old confidence showing through. Thorne's gathering his best men, true, but that means they're all professionals. Professionals follow patterns, and patterns can be predicted. As if proving his point, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the street. Quick draw Carson making. Another patrol round, right on schedule. Sam moved to the window, watching the gunman's reflection in a strategically placed mirror he'd installed years ago. See how he favors his right side? Sam whispered. Old wound, probably that business in Dodge City. Slows his draw by a fraction of a second. Every man Thorne's bringing has a story like that, a weakness I can use. Sarah had known Sam for 7 years, ever since she'd bought the store after her husband's death. She'd seen him play the role of harmless old rancher perfectly, but now, watching him analyze his opponents with cold precision, she finally understood why his legend had once spread terror through the criminal underworld. A sudden commotion from the street drew their attention. One of the local ranch hands, young Billy Matthews, had stumbled out of the saloon drunk and was confronting Carson, apparently offended by the gunman's fancy city clothes. No, Sarah breathed, recognizing the danger. Billy doesn't know. Watch, Sam cut her off softly, already moving. Carson's hand was dropping to his gun with practiced speed, but before he could clear leather, a trembling voice called out from the shadows. Now, boy, Sam shuffled forward, playing his role perfectly. Ain't no need for trouble. Why don't I help you home? Sleep this off? Carson's hand hesitated on his gun. All he saw was a harmless old man. Exactly what he expected to see. But in that moment of hesitation, Sam had closed the distance between them with deceptive speed. His trembling hand gripped Carson's wrist, with sudden iron strength, applying pressure to nerve points that would make drawing the gun impossible. Easy there, son. Sam's voice maintained its elderly quaver even as he commanded the situation. Let's all just calm down. Billy, suddenly sobered by his brush with death, allowed himself to be led away by the seemingly helpful old rancher. Carson, massaging his mysteriously numb gun hand, never realized how close he'd come to discovering the truth about Samuel Hawkins. Back in the store's storeroom, Sam's demeanor changed instantly. It's starting, he told Sarah. Thorne's men are getting restless, making mistakes. They'll push too hard, too fast. Like father, like son, Sarah observed, remembering the stories in Sam's journal. Exactly. Sam checked his pocket watch. Martha's last message said the main force is gathering at Thunder Pass. They'll wait for dawn, trying to catch the town sleeping. But you'll be ready. We'll be ready, Sam corrected her. Every person in this town has a part to play, whether they know it or not. Even young Billy out there. His drunk act was perfect. Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. He was working for you? Part of your network? Martha recruited his father years ago. The boy's been trained to create distractions when needed, though he doesn't know the whole story. Just thinks he's helping keep the peace. Sam allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the best defenders are the ones who don't know they're defending anything. A subtle signal from Buck drew their attention. The dog's ears were perked toward the street, his training allowing him to detect movement long before human ears could. More riders, Sam whispered, moving to his observation point. Through the carefully placed mirrors, He could see 3 men approaching from the direction of Thunder Pass. Their horses were lathered. They'd ridden hard to arrive ahead of schedule. Snake-Eye Thompson, he identified the lead rider, and Mexican Pete. Thorne's getting impatient, sending his best scouts ahead. You know them all, Sarah observed. Had to. Spent 2 years infiltrating their organization before bringing them down. Learn every habit, every tell, every weakness. Sam checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. That's why Thorne really wants me dead. Not just for destroying his gang, but for proving they weren't as smart as they thought they were. The approaching riders split up, taking positions around the town with professional precision. They were good, Sam had to admit. If he hadn't spent years preparing for exactly this scenario, their surveillance pattern would have been nearly perfect. It's time, he told Sarah. Get word to Doc Wilson. We'll need his surgery ready, and make sure Sheriff Grant stays out of it for now. When the shooting starts, we want him focused on protecting the townspeople. What about you? Sam's hand moved to the worn handle of his Colt, the tremor completely gone now. I'm going to give Snake-Eye Thompson exactly what he's looking for, a chance to spot the shadow of the West. Let him carry the word back to Thorne that his suspicions were right. That's dangerous, Sarah protested. If they know for sure who you are. Sometimes, Sam replied, checking his ammunition one final time. The best way to spring a trap is to let your enemy think they've sprung one of their own. The rising sun painted long shadows across Redemption Creek's main street as Sam positioned himself for his next move. Through his network of carefully placed mirrors and viewing ports, he tracked Snake-Eye Thompson's movement through town. The scout was good, Sam had to admit. His observation pattern was nearly perfect, checking sight lines and potential ambush points with professional precision. But Snake-Eye was looking for threats at street level. Like most men, he never thought to look up. From his hidden perch in the church bell tower, Sam watched through his spyglass as the scout made his way toward the bank. Buck remained below, positioned to warn of any approach, his training allowing him to appear as nothing more than a common street dog to casual observers. Martha's latest telegraph message echoed in Sam's mind. Thorne's main force moving earlier than expected. Dawn attack likely. The old outlaw's impatience would work in Sam's favor. Men who moved too quickly made mistakes, and Sam had spent a lifetime learning to exploit such errors. From his vantage point, Sam could see Mexican Pete setting up his own observation post in the abandoned livery stable, while James Thorne maintained his position near the saloon. Their triangulated coverage of the bank would have been impressive if Sam hadn't spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear despite the years, the night he'd first confronted the Thorne gang, back when he wore a marshal's badge openly. He'd tracked them to a hideout in the Bitter Creek Mountains, only to find himself walking into an ambush. That night had taught him the value of patience, of letting enemies think they held the upper hand until the perfect moment to strike. The sound of approaching horses drew his attention. Through his spyglass he spotted Snake-Eye giving the prearranged signal. 3 short flashes with a pocket mirror, undetectable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The response came from Thunder Pass. 4 riders approaching, moving fast but trying to stay concealed behind the morning's dust. Right on schedule, Sam whispered, recognizing Blackjack Thorne's signature black stallion among the riders. The old outlaw had always favored dramatic entrances. Even illness and age hadn't changed that about him. Sam shifted positions silently, moving to another pre-prepared observation point. His hand brushed against an old wanted poster tucked into his jacket, one of the few remaining images of the shadow of the West from his martial days. The artist's sketch showed a younger man, face half hidden by a black duster's collar, but those eyes were the same. They hadn't lost their intensity, just learned to hide it better. Movement at the south end, Martha's telegraph clicked quietly. 2 more riders, heavily armed. One matches the description of the preacher. Sam's jaw tightened. The preacher, another ghost from his past. The man had been Thorne's spiritual advisor and unofficial strategist, known for quoting scripture, while planning the gang's most brutal raids. Sam had thought him dead after the last confrontation, fallen into a river during the firefight. His survival complicated things. Through his spyglass, Sam studied the approaching riders. The preacher hadn't changed much, still wore his black coat and clerical collar, though now his hair had gone white as snow. The man riding beside him was new, young, and nervous-looking, probably a recent recruit. "Martha," Sam telegraphed back, "check our records on the preacher's movements over the past year. Something's not right about his timing." The response came quickly. "Reports place him in Mexico until last month, suddenly reappeared when Thorne started gathering his men." Sam's mind worked through the implications. The preacher's return now, after 15 years. It couldn't be coincidence. There had to be another layer to Thorne's plan, something beyond simple revenge. A subtle movement caught his eye. Snake Eye was getting careless, letting his frustration show as he searched for signs of the man he suspected was more than just a harmless rancher. Sam made his decision. It was time to give the scout something to report back to his boss. Moving with fluid grace that belied his apparent age, Sam descended from his perch using handholds he'd prepared years ago. Buck fell in beside him silently as he made his way to the general store's back entrance. Sarah was waiting, having watched the entire scene unfold. "They're moving faster than we expected," she whispered, helping him check his equipment one final time. "Good," Sam replied, his voice carrying none of its usual tremor. "The faster they move, the more mistakes they'll make. Thorne never could resist pushing too hard, too fast." "The preacher's return worries you," Sarah observed, noting the tension in his movements. "He was always the smart one," Sam admitted. "The man could quote scripture and plan an ambush with equal skill. His presence means there's more to this than we thought." A commotion from the street drew their attention. Snake Eye had finally worked his way around to the store's front, making a show of being just another customer. Sam's lips curved in a grim smile. "Time to give him what he's looking for," he said softly. "When I leave, wait 2 minutes, then send Buck with the signal. Martha's people need to be ready." Sarah watched as Sam transformed himself, shoulders slumping, hands developing their familiar tremor. The change was incredible. In seconds, the dangerous man she'd been talking to vanished, replaced by the harmless old rancher the town knew so well. "Sam," she called softly as he reached for the door. "The preacher. If he's involved, this could be about more than just you. The whole territory could be at risk." "I know," Sam replied, his hand steady on his concealed weapon despite his outward appearance of frailty. "That's why we're going to end it here, once and for all." As he shuffled out into the morning sun, Sam could feel Snake Eye's eyes on him, searching for any sign that would confirm his suspicions. The scout was about to get exactly what he was looking for, just enough truth to make him dangerous, but not enough to reveal the full scope of what awaited the Thorne gang in Redemption Creek. The ghost of the Shadow of the West was about to make his first appearance in 15 years, and like all good ghost stories, this one would begin with just a glimpse, enough to make men question everything they thought they knew about the quiet old rancher who lived at the edge of town. Sam shuffled down the boardwalk with practiced fragility, feeling Snake Eye's gaze boring into his back. Every trembling step was calculated, every nervous glance precisely timed. The scout was about to get his first glimpse of the truth, but only on Sam's terms. As he passed the saloon, commotion erupted exactly as planned. 2 of Martha's men, posing as drunk cowboys, stumbled into the street, their staged argument growing louder by the second. Snake Eye's attention shifted briefly to assess the potential threat, and in that moment, Sam's entire demeanor changed. For just 3 seconds, the trembling hands steadied. The stooped posture straightened, and when he turned to glance at the disturbance, his eyes held the cold, calculating look that had once struck fear into the hearts of the territory's most hardened criminals. Then, just as quickly, the mask, of the harmless old rancher slipped back into place. Through his peripheral vision, Sam saw Snake Eye freeze, his hand unconsciously moving toward his gun. The scout had seen exactly what Sam wanted him to see, just enough to confirm his suspicions, but not enough to be certain. Now he would have to report back to Thorne, and that uncertainty would force them to accelerate their plans. "Martha," Sam telegraphed once he was safely back in his prepared position, "tell me about our friend's reaction." The response came quickly. Snake Eyes moving fast, headed for Thunder Pass, riding like the devil himself is on his tail. The preacher watched the whole thing from the church steps. "He's smiling, Sam." That last detail troubled Sam more than he cared to admit. The preacher's smile had always meant trouble back in the old days. The man had an uncanny ability to see through deceptions, to understand the layers of a strategy in ways that even Blackjack Thorne couldn't match. Buck appeared silently at Sam's side, carrying a folded note in his mouth. Another message. From Sarah. The dog's training allowed him to move through town completely unnoticed, delivering communications that no one would suspect. "The preacher visited the bank this morning," Sarah's note read. "Asked about property records dating back 20 years. Something about old Spanish land grants." Sam's mind raced through the implications. Land grants, the preacher's sudden return. From Mexico, Thorne gathering his best men for what seemed like excessive force for a simple revenge mission. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, but he needed more information. "Martha," he telegraphed, "check our records. Any connection between Thorne and Spanish land claims in the territory?" While waiting for a response, Sam moved to another observation post, this one giving him a clear view of James Thorne's position near the bank. The young man was trying to hide his nervousness, but Sam could read it in every movement. Unlike his father, James hadn't learned to control his calls. "Records show something interesting," Martha's reply came. "Before your last confrontation. With Thorne, he was negotiating with Mexican authorities about old royal land grants. The preacher was his representative in those talks. The pattern suddenly became clear. 15 years ago, when Sam had brought down Thorne's gang, he'd interrupted more than just their criminal operations. The old outlaw had been on the verge of something bigger, claiming vast tracts of territory through ancient Spanish legal documents. Documents that the preacher had apparently spent years tracking down in Mexico. A movement at the edge of town caught Sam's attention. Through his spyglass, he could see Blackjack Thorne himself riding in, flanked by 4 of his most trusted men. The old outlaw's illness was visible in the way he sat on his horse, but his eyes still burned with the same fierce intelligence Sam remembered. "Sarah," Sam whispered, into a speaking tube that connected to the store's basement. "How long would it take you to access the old land office records? The ones stored in the bank's vault?" 10 minutes if Tom Jenkins helps. He still owes you for saving his ranch last winter. Do it. I need to know what the preacher was looking for." Sam watched as Thorne's group made their way to the saloon, noting how they positioned themselves to cover all approaches. "And Sarah, be careful. I think we're dealing with more than just revenge now." Through his network of observation points, Sam could see the whole pattern of Thorne's men taking positions throughout Redemption Creek. They were setting up for something big, but the bank robbery that seemed to be their obvious target was starting to look more like a distraction. "Sam," Martha's telegraph clicked urgently, "just intercepted a message between the preacher and someone in Mexico, translated from Spanish. The documents must be secured before the territorial governor arrives next week." Everything clicked into place. The territorial governor's visit, the old land grants, the preacher's careful research. Thorne wasn't just after revenge. He was planning to use the chaos of his attack on Sam to cover a much larger operation, one that could change the ownership of half the territory if those Spanish land grants proved valid. Sam's hand moved to his hidden holster, checking his weapon by touch alone. He'd prepared for Thorne seeking revenge, but this was something else entirely. The lives of everyone in Redemption Creek were now caught up in a scheme that went far beyond a personal vendetta. Through his spyglass, Sam watched as Snake Eye finally reached Thorne's position, gesturing animatedly as he reported what he'd seen. The old outlaw's reaction was immediate. He sat straighter in his saddle, some of his old vigor returning as he barked orders to his men. "They're moving," Martha reported. "All of them." Whatever Snake Eye said lit a fire under the whole operation. Sam allowed himself a grim smile. The first phase of his plan had worked. He'd forced Thorne's hand, made him rush his carefully, laid plans. Now came the dangerous part, letting the old outlaw think he was springing a trap, while actually leading him and his entire gang into one of Sam's making. "Time to wake the ghosts," Sam whispered, his voice carrying none of its usual quaver as he began moving toward his next position. The shadow of the West was about to make his presence known in a way that would remind Thorne and his men exactly why that name had once made them wake in cold sweats. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Redemption Creek as Thorne's men began their move. Sam watched from his hidden position as they executed what would have been a perfect operation against any normal target. Teams of 2 and 3 spread out through the town, establishing overlapping fields of fire, cutting off escape routes they thought their quarry might use. They had no way of knowing that every position they took had been carefully prepared over. The years, sight lines subtly altered, cover points strategically weakened or strengthened, even the town's layout itself gently modified through Sam's quiet influence on building projects and repairs. The preacher's heading for the bank's side entrance. Martha's telegraph clicked. "He's carrying something. Looks like old document cases." Through his spyglass, Sam studied the man's movements. The preacher wasn't just walking, he was checking angles, sight lines, exactly as Sam would have done. "He knows," Sam whispered to Buck. "He's figured out part of it at least." A memory surfaced. The preacher facing him across a burning church 15 years ago, quoting Ecclesiastes even as he reloaded his gun. "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven." The man had always understood the deeper game, the layers beneath the obvious. Sarah's voice came through the speaking tube, urgent but controlled. "Land office records confirm it, Sam. The Spanish grants the preacher found could give Thorne legal claim to every water source from here to the territorial capital, with the governor arriving next week to settle land disputes. He could control the entire territory's water rights," Sam finished. "Every ranch, every farm, every town would have to deal with him." The scope of Thorne's plan was breathtaking, using his revenge against Sam as cover for a takeover that would give him more power than he'd ever had as an outlaw. Movement caught his eye. James Thorne was getting agitated, his youth showing as he paced near the bank's front entrance. The young man's hand kept straying to his gun, his eyes darting around too quickly to be effective. Like father, like son, Sam mused, remembering how Blackjack had shown the same tells early in his career. Nervous energy before a big play, Doc. Wilson's subtle signal from his office window confirmed that the town's defenders were in position. Over the years, Sam had quietly trained a select group of townspeople, never letting them know the full scope of his preparations, but ensuring they could protect themselves if needed. "Martha," Sam telegraphed, "status on Thorne's backup?" "2 more groups approaching from the south," came the reply. "Heavy wagons with them. One of our scouts got close enough to see mining equipment and explosives." Sam's jaw tightened. Mining equipment meant Thorne wasn't just after the land grants. He already had buyers lined up, probably Eastern mining companies ready to exploit the water rights he planned to claim. The old outlaw had spent his years in hiding, building a web of legitimate business connections. Through his observation network, Sam could see Mexican Pete signaling to Snake Eye. They were ready to move on the bank. The preacher stood on the church steps, still smiling that knowing smile as he watched the pieces fall into place. "Sarah," Sam whispered into the speaking tube, "get everyone in position. When this starts—" "We're ready," she cut him off. "Jimmy's already led the other children to the cave system. Doc Wilson has his surgery prepared. Even Tom Jenkins has those old Civil War rifles distributed to the ranch hands." Sam allowed himself a moment of pride. He'd chosen well when he decided to make Redemption Creek his home. These people might not know his true identity, but they'd absorbed his lessons about preparation and protection. A flash of movement. Quick draw. Carson was getting into position behind the saloon, trying to set up a crossfire position. But Sam had modified that building's rear wall years ago, subtly weakening certain boards while reinforcing others. Carson's chosen spot would become a trap the moment shooting started. Sam, Martha's telegraph was urgent now. The preacher's sending. More signals. Different code, not one we know. Someone else is involved. That was troubling. The preacher had always been the cautious one, the planner. If he was communicating with yet another player in this game, Sam's mind raced through possibilities. Who else would have a stake in this elaborate plan? His answer came in the form of a well-dressed man stepping out of the bank, Harold Montgomery, representative of the Eastern Mining Consortium. Sam had noticed him in town last week, but hadn't made the connection until now. "Martha, check your records on Montgomery. Full background." The reply came quickly. "Multiple connections to railroad companies and mining interests. Recently made large land purchases throughout the territory, all near water sources. Sam, he's been buying up properties around every possible railroad route through the region." The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about water rights. Thorne and his allies were positioning themselves to control both water and rail access to the entire territory. The bank robbery would destroy the local land records. The Spanish grants would give them legal claim to the water, and the railroad deals would complete their monopoly. "Time to change the game," Sam whispered, checking his weapons one final time. They thought they were setting up to trap a legendary lawman, to force the Shadow of the West into the open. Instead, they'd walked into an elaborate snare 15 years in the making. Buck's ears suddenly perked up. He'd caught something even Sam's trained senses hadn't detected yet. Through his spyglass, Sam spotted the cause. Blackjack Thorne himself was moving into position, but something was off about his movements. The old outlaw's illness seemed to vanish as he dismounted, his previous weakness appearing now as the act it had been. "So that's your play," Sam muttered, watching his old adversary move with familiar, deadly grace. "Two can fake being old and weak." He scratched Buck behind the ears, a signal that sent the dog silently moving to his next position. Time to remind them why some legends are best left in the shadows. The afternoon heat shimmered off Redemption Creek's main street as Sam made his first real move. His steps were measured and deliberate as he shuffled toward the bank, maintaining his elderly facade while positioning himself exactly where he needed to be. To anyone watching, he was just another old-timer going about his business, exactly what Thorne's men expected to see. "The preacher's watching you." Martha's telegraph clicked softly in the device hidden under his coat. "He's not buying the act." "Good," Sam whispered back, his lips barely moving. "He always was the smart one. Time to give him something to think about." As he passed the saloon, Sam stumbled, a perfectly executed piece of theater that had him grabbing onto a hitching post for support. His trembling hands made a show of checking his pockets. Then his face registered a gentle alarm. "My medicine," he called out, voice quavering perfectly. "Must have left it at Sarah's store." Through his carefully arranged mirrors, Sam watched the ripple effect of his performance. Quick Draw Carson relaxed slightly at his post. Snake eyes. Hand moved away from his gun, and even James Thorne's nervous tension eased a fraction. Only the preacher's expression remained unchanged, those calculating eyes following Sam's every move. Sam shuffled back toward the general store, but his path wasn't random. Each step took him past pre-prepared positions, letting him check the placement of Thorne's men while appearing to simply wander. He noted with satisfaction that they'd positioned themselves exactly where he'd predicted they would. "Martha," he telegraphed, signaled Doc Wilson, time for his part. Moments later, the town doctor came hurrying out of his office, medical bag in hand. "Sam," he called out, playing his role perfectly. "Been looking for you. That medicine I ordered finally came in." Why don't you come by the office? It was a masterful bit of misdirection. To Thorne's men, it would appear that the old rancher's movements were being dictated by others, not his own careful strategy. But as Sam changed direction to follow the doctor, he was actually moving into position for what came next. Buck appeared, right on cue, trotting up to Sam with something in his mouth, a small package wrapped in brown paper. The dog's arrival drew every eye in the street, exactly as planned. While Thorne's men watched Sam fumble with the package, none of them noticed Sarah's boy Jimmy slipping through the back alleys, delivering final instructions to the townspeople who were part of Sam's defensive network. Movement at Thunder Pass, Martha reported. The supply wagons are starting their approach. They're not even trying to hide them anymore. Sam allowed himself a grim smile. Thorne's confidence was growing. He thought he had every angle covered, every escape route blocked. The old outlaw hadn't learned the most important lesson from their last encounter. Sometimes the most dangerous trap is the one that doesn't look like a trap at all. Through his network of mirrors and observation points, Sam watched the preacher finally make his move. The man walked casually into the bank, the document cases still tucked under his arm. But his path took him past each of Thorne's men, and Sam caught the subtle hand signals being exchanged. "They're getting ready," he whispered to Doc Wilson as they reached the clinic's door. 10 minutes, maybe less. The doctor nodded imperceptibly, his hand brushing against the revolver hidden under his coat. Like many in town, he'd been carefully selected and trained by Sam over the years, though he didn't know the full scope of what he was part of. Inside the clinic, Sam's transformation was immediate. His stooped posture straightened, the tremor vanished from his hands, and his eyes took on the sharp focus that had once made him legendary. "They've set up kill zones here, here, and here." He indicated positions on a map spread across the doctor's desk. "But they don't know about the reinforced walls we installed last summer, or the false front on the bank that'll stop anything short of a cannon." "Sam," Doc Wilson's voice was tight with concern, "there's something else. The preacher. He wasn't just looking at land records. He was asking about old mining claims, specifically the cave system under town." Sam's mind raced through the implications. The caves had been his ace in the hole, a complex network of tunnels he'd mapped and modified over years, creating escape routes and safe havens throughout the town. If the preacher had somehow learned about them— "Martha," he telegraphed. "Urgently, check the mining company's recent purchases. Any claims near the cave entrances?" The response was immediate and troubling. 3 claims filed last month, all under different names. They form a triangle around the town's main water source. It was elegant, Sam had to admit. The Spanish land grants would give them legal claim to the water rights on the surface, while the mining claims would let them control everything underground. If they succeeded, they could literally cut off the town's water from above and below. A subtle signal from Buck drew their attention. Dog's ears were perked toward the street. He'd caught something even Sam's trained senses hadn't detected yet. "They're moving," Doc Wilson whispered, peering through a carefully prepared observation slot. "Blackjack himself is heading for the bank." Sam watched through his own viewing port as Thorne walked down the street, all pretense of illness gone. Now. The old outlaw moved with the same deadly grace Sam remembered, his black duster swooping behind him like dark wings. "So that's how it's going to be," Sam murmured, checking his weapons one final time. 2 old ghosts, dropping their masks at last. Through the clinic's window, he could see the preacher emerging from the bank, those document cases now conspicuously absent. The man's eternal smile had taken on an almost anticipatory quality as he took up position near the church. "Martha," Sam telegraphed, "give the signal. Time to show them what 15 years of preparation looks like." As if in response, a church bell began to toll. Not the regular rings for time or service, but a complex pattern that meant nothing to Thorne's men, but carried clear instructions to Sam's hidden network of defenders. "Remember," he told Doc Wilson, "when the shooting starts, your only job is protecting the wounded. Leave the rest to me and Buck." the dog's muscles tensed at his words, years of training coming to the fore as he prepared for what was coming. The Shadow of the West was about to remind Thorne's gang why some legends are born in blood and best left undisturbed. The church bell's echo had barely faded when the first shots rang out. Quick Draw Carson, true to his name, drew first, but he was firing at shadows, at carefully placed reflections Sam had positioned to draw fire and expose the gang's positions. "Right on schedule," Sam murmured, watching through his network of mirrors as Thorne's men revealed themselves one by one. Each muzzle flash, each shouted command, told him exactly where they were and what they were planning. Blackjack Thorne stood in the middle of the street, his black duster catching the late afternoon wind. "Come out, Shadow!" His voice carried the same commanding power Sam remembered. 15 years is long enough for hide and seek, don't you think? Instead of answering, Sam triggered the first of his prepared surprises. A series of small explosions, more noise and smoke than actual damage, erupted along the street. In the chaos, none of Thorne's men noticed bucks slipping through their ranks, disabling their horses one by one with quick, silent bites to the reins and saddle straps. "Multiple riders approaching from Thunder Pass," Martha's telegraph clicked urgently. "Mining company men, heavily armed. They're moving the wagons into position around the water tower." Through his spyglass, Sam watched the preacher directing men to key positions around town. The man's strategy was obvious now. They weren't just trying to trap Sam. They were securing every access point to the underground water sources. "Sarah," Sam whispered into his communication tube. "Status in the bank vault?" "Documents are secured," she replied. "Jimmy's already moved them through the tunnel system." "But Sam," the preacher left something behind. A map showing cave systems we didn't even know about. That was troubling. Sam had spent years mapping the caves beneath Redemption Creek, but if there were passages he'd missed. His thoughts were interrupted by another volley of gunfire, this time from Snake Eye's position near the livery stable. "Getting impatient, aren't they?" Doc Wilson observed, calmly loading his shotgun. "Fear does that to men," Sam replied, checking his own weapons. "Especially men who've spent 15 years looking over their shoulders, waiting for a ghost to find them." Through his carefully placed mirrors, Sam could see James Thorne moving toward the bank's rear entrance, trying to be stealthy but betraying his position with every nervous glance. The young man's inexperience could be useful. "Martha, signal. Tom Jenkins, time for the ranch hands to make their appearance." Moments later, a group of cowboys appeared at the edge of town, riding in hard as if just arriving. To Thorne's men, they looked like simple ranch hands returning from their day's work. In reality, they were some of the best fighters in the territory, hand-picked by Sam over the years. The effect was immediate. James Thorne's attention shifted to the new arrivals, creating the opening Sam needed. With fluid grace that would have shocked anyone who knew him as the old rancher, Sam moved from his position in the clinic to a pre-prepared spot in the adjacent building. "They're splitting their forces," Martha reported, half focusing on the newcomers, half maintaining positions. "Around the bank." "Just like we planned," Sam replied. "Tell Jenkins to keep them occupied. The real show's about to start." A sharp whistle split the air, the preacher's signal to begin the next phase of their operation. Sam watched as men began moving mining equipment from the wagons, heading for specific points around town. They were preparing to blast their way into the cave system. "Time to remind them why they called me the Shadow," Sam whispered. He touched the brim of his hat, a signal that sent Buck racing silently through town, triggering a series of carefully prepared distractions. The first was a stampede of horses from the livery stable, causing chaos among Thorne's men. The second was a series of small fires that erupted simultaneously in strategic locations, forcing them to split their attention further. But the third was Sam himself. Moving like a ghost through the chaos, Sam approached his first target. Quick Draw. Carson never saw what hit him. One moment he was aiming at the stampeding horses. The next his gun hand was numb, a pressure point strike having disabled it temporarily. "Tell your boss," Sam whispered in the gunman's ear, his voice carrying none of its usual quaver. "The shadow sends his regards." Then he was gone, vanishing into the smoke before Carson could even turn around. "Sam," the preacher's voice carried across the chaos, "I know what you're doing. The same tricks you used in the Carson City raid. But we learned from that mistake." Through the smoke and confusion, Sam could see Blackjack Thorne smiling. The old outlaw reached into his duster and pulled out something that made Sam's blood run cold, a detailed map of the cave system, including passages even Sam hadn't known about. "Found these in Mexico," Thorne called out, waving the papers. "Amazing what old Spanish missionaries wrote down. They mapped everything under this town long before either of us was born." "Martha," Sam telegraphed urgently, "get me everything we have on Spanish mission records in the area." "Already looking," came the reply. "Sam, there's something else. The mining claims, they're not just random. They form a pattern, matching points on an old mission map." Sam's mind raced through the implications. The preacher hadn't just been doing research on land grants. He'd uncovered something bigger, something the old Spanish missionaries had found in the caves beneath Redemption Creek. An explosion rocked the town, one of the mining charges going off prematurely. Through the settling dust, Sam could see James Thorne looking panicked, realizing things were spinning out of control. "Like father, like son," Sam muttered. Neither one could ever wait for the right moment. But as he watched Blackjack Thorne's satisfied smile, Sam realized the chaos might be exactly what the old outlaw wanted. Sometimes the best way to find a hidden enemy was to shake the ground until he had to move. The game was changing, becoming something more complex than simple. Revenge. Whatever was hidden in those caves, whatever the Spanish missionaries had found, it was big enough to bring one of the territory's most notorious outlaws out of retirement. "Well," Sam whispered, checking his weapons one final time, "they wanted to see the shadow of the West. Time to give them a proper demonstration of why some legends are best left alone." As smoke drifted across Redemption Creek's main street, Sam moved like a phantom through his carefully prepared network of hidden passages. The town he'd spent 15 years modifying had become a maze of secret routes and concealed vantage points, each one now playing its part in his elaborate strategy. "Second mining team in position," Martha's telegraph clicked. "They're setting charges at all the points marked on the Spanish mission map. Sam, they're going deeper than any known cave system should go." Through a concealed peephole, Sam watched as the preacher directed men with surveying equipment, their measurements far too precise for simple claim jumping. Whatever the Spanish missionaries had found beneath Redemption Creek, these men knew exactly where to look for it. "Sarah," he whispered into his communication tube, "what did you find in those bank records?" "It's not just land grants," she replied, her voice tight with concern. "There are letters, Sam. The missionaries wrote about finding something in the caves, something they thought should stay buried." A memory surfaced, something the preacher had said during their last confrontation 15 years ago. He'd quoted scripture about treasures hidden in darkness and secrets kept since the foundation of the world. At the time, Sam had thought it just another of the man's philosophical musings. Martha cross-referenced those mining claims with the mission letters. What exactly were those priests trying to keep hidden? Before she could respond, another explosion rocked the town, this one more controlled, more precise than the first. Through his network of observation points, Sam could see teams of men moving mining equipment into position with professional efficiency. "They're not just random prospectors," he muttered to Buck as the dog appeared silently beside him. "These are professional mining engineers. Thorne spent 15 years building more than just business connections." A sudden commotion drew his attention to the street. James Thorne was arguing with his father, his voice carrying clear through Sam's listening devices. "The water rights were supposed to be enough. You never said anything about—" "Quiet, boy!" Blackjack's command cracked like a whip. "The water was just the beginning. What's under this town is worth more than all the gold in California." Sam's mind raced through possibilities. The Spanish missionaries had been known to hide more than just religious artifacts in their secret caves. Some had been guardians of treasures looted from native temples, others had concealed evidence of discoveries they thought the world wasn't ready to face. Sam, Martha's telegraph was urgent now, found something in the mission records. The priests weren't just hiding treasure. They sealed off an entire underground complex. Something about metal that glows in the dark and rocks that burn with eternal fire. A chill ran down Sam's spine. He'd heard rumors of such things. Ancient native, mines that produced strange metals, caves where the rocks themselves seemed alive with unknown energies. Most had dismissed such tales as superstition, but the Spanish missionaries had been meticulous record keepers. Through his spyglass, Sam watched as the preacher consulted another map, this one clearly older than the others. The man's usual smile had been replaced by an expression of intense concentration as he directed the mining teams to specific points around town. "They're creating a pattern," Sarah observed through the speaking tube. "The explosion points, they form some kind of geometric shape." Sam quickly sketched the positions on his own map, and suddenly the pattern became clear. "It's a key," he realized. "The explosions aren't just for access. They're opening something up. Something the missionaries sealed away." Buck's ears suddenly perked up, catching something even Sam's trained senses hadn't detected. Through their network of mirrors, they could see Mexican Pete and Snake Eye moving into new positions. Their attention focused not on the bank but on specific points around the explosion sites. "Martha, get me everything you can on Spanish sealing rituals. What would they have used to lock away something they thought was dangerous?" The response came quickly. According to the mission records, they used a system of controlled cave-ins, precisely placed support pillars. They believed certain geometric patterns could contain... Sam, some of these descriptions don't make sense. They wrote about light that moves like water and stones that sing with strange voices. Another explosion shook the town, but this one was different. Instead of the sharp crack of dynamite, it was a deep, resonant boom that seemed to come from far below the surface. Through his observation points, Sam could see Blackjack Thorne's satisfied smile. "Found it," the old outlaw muttered, loud enough for Sam's listening devices to pick up. "Just like the preacher said we would." The sound of heavy machinery being moved into position echoed through the streets. Whatever Thorne and his men had uncovered, they were preparing to excavate it quickly. "Sam," Sarah's voice was tense. "Jimmy just came back from scouting the cave entrances. He says there's some kind of light coming from the new openings, not lanterns or dynamite fire. Something else. Something wrong." Making a quick decision, Sam moved to another pre-prepared position, this one giving him a clear view of the main excavation site. What he saw made his blood run cold. The mining engineers were pulling back in alarm as a strange, pulsing glow emerged from the darkness below. "Martha, signal everyone. Get the townspeople to the high ground shelters. Whatever the preacher and his Spanish missionaries were trying to keep buried, it's about to see daylight again." Through his spyglass, Sam could see the preacher's smile returning as he watched the mysterious light grow stronger. The man turned, seeming to look directly at Sam's hidden position, and quoted softly, "And in the last days that which was hidden shall be revealed." "Some things," Sam whispered, checking his weapons one final time, "are meant to stay in shadow." He signaled to Buck, sending the dog to alert their network of defenders. The game had changed. This was no longer just about water rights or revenge. Whatever lay beneath Redemption Creek, whatever the Spanish missionaries had sealed away generations ago, was about to become a new kind of threat. And Sam, the man who had spent 15 years preparing for every contingency, found himself facing something even the shadow of the West hadn't seen coming. The strange light pulsing from beneath Redemption Creek cast otherworldly shadows across the town as Sam made his way through his network of hidden passages. The mysterious glow seemed to respond to the mining explosions, growing stronger with each blast that broke through the missionaries' ancient seals. "Martha," he telegraphed, watching Thorne's men gather around the main excavation site. What else do those mission records say about what they found down there? Most of it's in code, came the reply. But there are warnings, Sam. The priests wrote about metal that sings to men's souls and lights that drive good men to madness. They sealed it away, not just to hide it, but to protect people from it. Through his spyglass, Sam studied the preacher's face as the man examined the growing light. The usual serene smile was gone, replaced by something closer to religious fervor as he consulted his ancient maps. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Blackjack Thorne's voice carried across the evening air. "Worth every year spent tracking it down. The Spanish thought they could keep it hidden forever, but nothing stays buried that men want badly enough." Sam watched. As James Thorne approached the excavation site, his young face a mixture of awe and fear. "Father," he called out, "the mining engineers are saying we should stop." "The readings from their instruments. They've never seen anything like it." "Cowards," Thorne spat. "They don't understand what we've found. This is more than just mineral rights or water claims. This is power, the kind that built empires and toppled kingdoms." Through his concealed listening devices, Sam could hear the mining engineers arguing among themselves. Their instruments were showing impossible readings, and several men were complaining of headaches and disorientation the closer they got to the light. "Sarah," Sam whispered into his communication tube. "Status on the evacuation?" "Most of the townspeople are in the high ground shelters," she replied. "But Sam, some of Thorne's men are acting strange. The ones who've been closest to the excavation sites. They're becoming aggressive, unpredictable." Sam had noticed it too. The usually professional Snake Eye was pacing like a caged animal, his hands trembling on his rifle. Mexican Pete had abandoned his post entirely, drawn to the pulsing light like a moth to flame. "Martha, does anything in the mission records mention effects on people? Changes in behavior?" A moment passed before the response came. "Yes, the priests wrote about men becoming consumed by unholy desire when exposed to the lights. They said it awakens the darkness in men's hearts." Through his network of mirrors, Sam could see the preacher directing more men into the excavated tunnels, each carrying specialized equipment. The man's movements were precise, suggesting he knew exactly what they were dealing with. The missionaries weren't just trying to hide treasure, Sam realized aloud. They were containing something they thought was dangerous to the very souls of men. A commotion near the bank drew his attention. Quick Draw. Carson was arguing with James Thorne, both men's faces illuminated by the strange underground glow. Their voices carried clearly through Sam's listening devices. "Your father promised us gold." Carson's usually steady hand was shaking. On his gun. Not whatever this is. This ain't natural." "It's worth more than gold," James replied, but his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. "The mining companies already offered enough." Blackjack Thorne's command cut through their argument. "Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. But understand this. You walk away, you get nothing. Stay, and you'll have more wealth than you ever dreamed possible." Sam watched as the men wrestled with their fear and greed. A few backed away, heading for their horses, but most stayed, though their eyes kept darting nervously to the pulsing light from below. "Sam," Martha's telegraph clicked urgently. More decoded from the mission records. The priests, they didn't just seal the caves. They built their mission here specifically to guard them. They chose this site for a reason. Through his spyglass, Sam studied the geometric pattern of the explosion sites. The preacher hadn't placed them randomly. They formed a specific shape, like a key, unlocking something the missionaries had tried to keep sealed. "It's all connected," he whispered to. Buck as the dog appeared silently beside him. "The water rights, the mining claims, the land grants. Thorne wasn't just looking for legal control. He needed specific points around town to break the seals." The strange light suddenly intensified, accompanied by a deep humming that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the earth. Sam watched as several of Thorne's men dropped their weapons, moving as if hypnotized toward the main excavation site. "Martha, get me everything you can about the mission's original construction. There has to be a way to contain this again." "Working on it," came the reply. "But Sam, the priest wrote that once the seals were broken, the only way to restore them was through a specific ritual, something about sacred geometry and points of power." Through his observation network, Sam could see the preacher pulling out another ancient document, this one covered in complex diagrams. The man's lips moved as he read from it, quoting something in what sounded like Latin. "Sarah," Sam's voice was urgent now, "get Doc Wilson to check on anyone who's been near those lights, and tell Tom Jenkins to keep his men back. No one else." Goes near the excavation sites. A new sound caught his attention, a kind of singing, but not from human throats. It seemed to come from the very rocks themselves, growing stronger as more of the ancient seals were broken. "Some things," Sam muttered, checking his weapons one final time, "are buried for a reason." He watched as Blackjack Thorne approached, the pulsing light, his face transformed by its otherworldly glow. The old outlaw had found something far more dangerous than gold or water rights beneath Redemption Creek. Now Sam, the man who had spent 15 years preparing for every possible threat, found himself facing something no gun could stop, no strategy could outmaneuver. Whatever the Spanish missionaries had sealed away in these caves, it was awakening, and the shadow of the West might be the only thing standing between its power and the world above. The unearthly light from below Redemption Creek had transformed the town into something unrecognizable. Shadows danced with unnatural movement, and the air itself seemed to pulse with the strange energy rising from the missionaries' broken seals. Sam watched through his network of observation points as Blackjack Thorne's men succumbed one by one to the mysterious force they'd unleashed. Final decoded message from the mission records. Martha's telegraph clicked urgently. "Sam, the priests didn't just find something in these caves. They built the mission here to contain what was already ancient when they arrived. There are references to the Old Ones and those who dwelt here before time." Through his spyglass, Sam could see the preacher consulting his manuscripts with growing excitement. The man's usual calculating demeanor had given way to something close to religious ecstasy as he directed the mining teams to specific points around the excavation site. "The geometry is crucial," the preacher's voice carried clearly through Sam's listening devices. "Each point must be opened in precise sequence, just as the ancient texts describe. What the Spanish tried to contain, we shall unleash." "Martha," Sam telegraphed back, "get me everything on the mission's original construction. The priests must have built specific features into the town itself, ways to reinforce the seals if they were ever broken." "Already found something," came the swift reply. "The church's foundation stones form a pattern. The mission records say they were cut from a special rock quarried in Spain, blessed by the Pope himself." Sam's mind raced through implications. He'd spent 15 years modifying this town, building his own network of hidden passages and defensive positions. But what if the Spanish missionaries had done something similar centuries ago? What if Redemption Creek's very layout was designed as part of their containment system? Through his observation network, he watched as James Thorne approached his father at the main excavation site. The young man's face showed growing concern as he gestured at the mining engineers who were backing away from their instruments in obvious fear. "Father, something's wrong," James's voice shook slightly. "The readings, they're off the scale. And the men, they're not acting right. Even Snake Eye's gone strange." Indeed, the usually professional gunman was standing at the edge of the excavation, staring into the pulsing light with an expression of rapturous horror. His gun hung forgotten at his side as he swayed slightly, mumbling words that made no sense. "Your mother used to worry like this," Blackjack replied, his own voice carrying an unsettling edge of excitement. "Always saying we should leave well enough alone. But she never understood. Power like this comes once in a lifetime. The mining rights, the water claims, that was just the beginning. With what's down there, we could control everything. Sam. Sarah's voice came urgent through the speaking tube. Doc Wilson's reporting strange symptoms in anyone who's been near the excavation sites. Headaches, hallucinations, violent impulses, and the light. It's affecting the animals too. Every horse in town is trying to break free of its restraints. Buck pressed closer to Sam's side, the dog's training warring with instinct as the strange energy pulsed around them. Even this, far from the main site, Sam could feel it. A pressure behind his eyes, a whisper just below the edge of hearing. Martha, what do the mission records say about fighting this, whatever it is? The priests wrote about points of containment, specific places where their blessed stones could focus and redirect the energy. But Sam, they were working with dozens of men, all trained in their rituals. To seal it alone, not alone, Sam cut her off, watching as the preacher began arranging strange metal objects around the excavation site. They're setting up some kind of array. Look at the pattern. It's the inverse of what the missionaries used to seal it. Through his spyglass, Sam studied the objects more carefully. They looked like mining equipment at first glance, but their construction was too precise, too elaborate for simple prospecting tools. The preacher had spent 15 years preparing for this, just as Sam had spent 15 years preparing to protect the town. It's a focus point, he realized aloud. They're not just removing the seals, they're building something to actively draw out whatever's down there. Sam, Martha's telegraph was practically vibrating with urgency. Final translation from the mission records. The priests wrote that if the seals were ever fully broken, the energy would need a living vessel to fully manifest. Someone would have to willingly embrace it, become a conduit for its power. Through his network of mirrors, Sam watched as Blackjack Thorne approached the edge of the excavation, his face transformed by the pulsing light. The old outlaw's usual calculating expression had been replaced by something older, something hungry. 15. Years, Thorne called out, his voice carrying an unnatural resonance. 15 years since you broke my gang, drove me into hiding. But every curse has its blessing, Shadow. Without that defeat, I'd never have found the texts that led us here. Never have learned what the Spanish tried to keep buried. Sam moved, silently to a new position, noting how the strange light seemed to follow him, as if aware of his presence. The preacher's array was nearly complete, forming a perfect geometric pattern around the main excavation site. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, Sam called back, letting his voice carry from multiple directions, thanks to his carefully prepared acoustic tricks. The missionaries didn't seal this place to hide treasure. They sealed it to protect humanity from something they thought too dangerous to exist. Thorne's laughter echoed unnaturally across the transformed town. Protect? They were afraid, Shadow. Afraid of power they couldn't understand. But I understand. The preacher showed me the truth in those ancient texts. What's down there isn't just power. It's transformation, evolution. The next step for mankind. Sam watched as more of Thorne's men succumbed to the strange energy, their eyes taking on the same unnatural glow as the light from below. The old outlaw's revenge had become something far more dangerous than simple vengeance. He hadn't just found a weapon. He'd found something that could change the very nature of humanity itself. And as the light pulsed stronger, as the preacher's array neared completion, Sam realized that his 15 years of preparation were about to be tested in ways he'd never imagined. The Shadow of the West wasn't just fighting to protect a town anymore. He was fighting to prevent something ancient and terrible from returning to the world. The unearthly glow beneath Redemption Creek had reached its peak, transforming night into a twisted parody of day. Sam moved through his network of passages one last time, watching as Blackjack Thorne positioned himself at the center of the preacher's geometric array. The old outlaw's body seemed to pulse in sync with the ancient energy they'd unleashed, his shadow stretching and distorting in impossible ways. The mission records are clear, Martha's final telegraph clicked urgently. Once the vessel accepts the power, there's only one way to seal it again. Both vessel and conduit must be taken back to the depths. The priests called it the ultimate sacrifice. Through his spyglass, Sam watched as the preacher began the final ritual, his voice chanting in a mixture of Latin and something far older. The strange metal devices arranged around the excavation, sight hummed in response, each one glowing with the same otherworldly light that poured from below. "It's time, Shadow." Thorne's voice carried an unnatural resonance now, echoing not just through the air but seemingly through the mind itself. "Show yourself. Watch as I become something your guns and tricks can't touch." Sam's hand moved to his modified Colt, the weapon that had served him through countless battles. But he knew bullets wouldn't solve this fight. The Spanish missionaries had left another way, hidden in plain sight throughout the town he'd called home for 15 years. "Sarah," he whispered into his communication tube, "get everyone clear of the church, and tell Doc Wilson to start the sequence we discussed." Through his observation points, Sam could see James Thorne backing away from his father, finally understanding the full horror of what they'd unleashed. The young man's face showed the same fear Sam had seen in old photographs of the Spanish missionaries who'd first sealed this place. "Father, please," James called out, his voice shaking. "This isn't about water rights or revenge anymore. Look what it's doing to the men." Indeed, those of Thorne's gang who hadn't fled were transformed. Snake Eye stood rigid, his eyes glowing with the same light that poured from the earth. Mexican Pete had fallen to his knees, praying in a language no human tongue was meant to speak. Even the preacher's usual calculating demeanor had cracked, replaced by an expression of terrifying rapture. "Martha," Sam telegraphed, "initiated Protocol Omega, full authorization." The response was immediate. Church bells began to toll, not the normal pattern, but a complex sequence the Spanish missionaries had encoded in the town's very architecture. Each ring seemed to make the strange light waver, as if two ancient powers were meeting in conflict. "You think the old bells can stop this?" Thorne laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "The priests tried for decades to keep it buried, but some things can't be contained forever." Sam moved silently into position, Buck at his side. The dog's training held even against the otherworldly forces swirling around them. Together, they'd prepared for every possible threat to Redemption Creek. Now it was time to face one that no amount of conventional preparation could have anticipated. "Blackjack!" Sam called out, his voice carrying from multiple directions thanks to his acoustic preparations. "Those priests didn't just build containment seals, they left a way to fight back. Look at the town, really look at it. Every building, every street." Through his network of mirrors, Sam could see the moment of realization cross the preacher's face. The man's extensive research had shown him part of the truth, but not all of it. Redemption Creek wasn't just built to contain the ancient power, it was designed as a weapon against it. "The geometric pattern," the preacher whispered, his scholarly nature briefly overcoming the energy's influence. "The church, the bank, the town square, it's all part of a larger array." Sam triggered the next phase of his plan. Lights appeared at key points throughout town, not the sickly glow from below, but clean, pure illumination from mechanisms he'd spent years installing. Each light corresponded to a point in the missionaries' original containment pattern. 15 years, Sam called out, letting Thorne track his voice. 15 years I spent preparing this town's defenses, but the Spanish priests spent generations, building something far more powerful. Your revenge brought you right where they wanted their real enemies to be. The strange light from below suddenly pulsed violently, as if sensing the threat. Thorne staggered, caught between the ancient power he was trying to channel and the containment system built into the town's very foundations. "Now, Buck," Sam commanded. The dog raced through the chaos, triggering mechanisms that caused blessed stones to rise from hidden positions throughout the town. Each one added another point to the priest's geometric pattern of containment. "It's too late," Thorne shouted, but his voice held desperation now. "I can feel it, Shadow. The power. It's already part of me." "That's right," Sam replied, stepping into view for the first time. His appearance drew gasps from those still capable of rational thought. Gone was any trace of the harmless old rancher. The shadow of the West stood revealed in his full, dangerous glory. And that's exactly what the priests planned for. Moving. With fluid grace, Sam approached the edge of the preacher's array. Your revenge led you here, Blackjack. Led you to become exactly what those holy men prepared for. A vessel, ready to take the power back to the depths where it belongs. Thorne's eyes widened as he finally understood. The priests hadn't just built containment seals. They'd created a trap, waiting for someone whose pride and hunger for power would make them the perfect bait to draw the ancient force back to its prison. Now, Sam commanded. Doc Wilson and Tom Jenkins triggered the final mechanisms. The blessed stones pulsed with pure light, forming a perfect pattern of containment around the excavation site. The preacher's array, meant to draw power out, instead began pulling everything back into the depths. No, Thorne screamed, but he was no longer fully human. The power he'd tried to control had taken too strong a hold. As Sam watched, the old Outlaws form began to waver, drawn inexorably toward the pit his own ambition had opened. Father. James Thorne rushed forward, but Sam caught him, holding him back from the edge. Some prices, Sam said softly, have to be paid in full. The car. Light reached a blinding crescendo. When it faded, Blackjack Thorne was gone, taken back to the depths, along with the power he'd tried to unleash. The preacher's array lay shattered, its pieces smoking with residual energy. Around town, Thorne's surviving men dropped unconscious, freed from the ancient force's influence. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek, normal, natural sunlight replacing the otherworldly glow. Sam stood at the edge of the now sealed pit, Buck faithful at his side. His secret was out. The town would know now who had really lived among them these past 15 years. Was it worth it? Sarah asked softly, approaching with James Thorne in tow. Giving up your cover, everything you built here. Sam looked around at the town he'd protected, at the people who'd become more than just part of his disguise. Some things, he said quietly, are worth stepping out of the shadows for. And as the sun rose over Redemption Creek, the shadow of the West finally stepped fully into the light, ready to face whatever new chapter awaited. After all, some legends don't end. They just change form, becoming part of the very places and people they were meant to protect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.